So how many people will you have available to inspect vehicles?
Well, the requirement is that they go to a facility and get it inspected. So our staff
One of your
would
facilities?
not do it. No. This would be a licensed a facility that's licensed by the state. So it's kind of like when you get a smog check. You know, you have to go to a licensed facility to get a smog check.
Give me an example of a licensed facility other than a smog check that will actually inspect these vehicles.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm looking for the name of the. So the goal, the idea is, Bureau of Automotive Repair, thank you. So the idea is that you would go to a Bureau of Automotive Repair facility, and we have 19 points that they have to check in the inspection. And so the goal is that the facilities would sort of be able to step up. I mean, you know, I've had situations where I've wanted to purchase a used vehicle and I've brought it into one of these facilities and they're willing to take a look at it for me. And so the goal would be that these facilities would sort of participate in the market, come up with a charge for looking at the 19 points and allow people to do that.
So the idea is if a vehicle that is inspected by one of those facilities goes out into the market and for some reason one of the mechanical systems fails, is that mechanic shop held liable for that failure?
Since we haven't addressed that issue, the TNCs as companies currently are required to do those inspections, and what we are trying to do is add a layer of professionalism, so it's not just, oh, this driver who's driven in the past is looking at this vehicle, but we have an actual mechanic that would do that.
Well, I would encourage you to really look at an inspection system that really provides a regulatory function. We don't let the train companies do their own inspections. We don't let the gas companies do their own inspections. Any regulatory oversight we provide, it requires the government to do its job and provide that regulatory oversight. If we punt that to have somebody self-regulate themselves, they're just not going to do it. And if there is ever an accident, well, yeah, the insurance is going to cover it, but if the insurance is not sufficient enough to cover it and there is negligence, it gets everybody involved in a legal quagmire, including state agencies that have the function to provide the regulation. So I'm very interested in that area because I think these vehicles on the taxi side, they have inspectors throughout the region doing spot-on inspections. So they'll actually, in addition to the regular inspections, they go out and ensure that the vehicles at any point in time are inspected, and that's a very thorough process. And it's a consumer protection to ensure that the vehicles that are on the road are safe to be on the road, and they're not putting anybody in the public in any undue harm. So I think if the PUC is going to endeavor to regulate, they've got to make sure that if there is a regulatory function, it needs to be provided, if maybe by the Highway Patrol or maybe by staff. I know the taxi companies pay to have that service performed by a regulating agency, and the regulating agency has the trained staff to provide that service, and you're going to have to find a way to do that at a statewide level to ensure that these cars are safe to be on the road. Another question I was considering, do you consider the app that the public uses to call the service proprietary?
We haven't specifically looked at that issue. My guess is that we would consider it proprietary.
That you would consider proprietary? That you would?
Right.
Oh, okay. So again, I think in the other industries, you know, a meter is available to everybody. If I want to have a taxi, I buy a meter, and as long as the meter performs its function at measuring the trip, that's sufficient enough for me to comply with the government regulation to have a meter that measures the distance. Nothing in any other transportation, any device that's used, a phone, a cell phone, a meter, none of it's proprietary. So I'm concerned about monopolies, that we shouldn't be picking one communications device over another to create a monopoly in any transportation industry. I would really encourage you to look at that. I don't think if you permit somebody in that industry, you can decide whether the communication device or the trip measuring device that they use is adequate at measuring, at providing the communication with the public. They interact with this service, so that can't be. I don't believe it should be a proprietary technology. It should be available to anyone else that wants to work as a TNC. Any other companies that want to break into that market, if they want to become a state-sanctioned transportation provider, that they should use the same technology that you have deemed appropriate for that transportation. So I would really encourage you to look at that as well. Other questions that I have is, you mentioned that you're not looking at capping the amount of vehicles in a market, but you will be measuring in terms of how, you said you're collecting data right now in terms of where the activity is taking place.
Right.
Are you at all concerned about statewide coverage, serving underserved areas? I mean, we do that for all transportation, for telecommunications, trying to create access to transportation. My concern is that if you don't have a geographical limitation, you can basically flood the most lucrative markets, and that's where you will have the conglomeration of services, whereas areas that don't have lucrative markets won't necessarily have a base of transportation. If you're thinking of that, I encourage you to look at that to provide equal access for Californians for transportation services. And I think I'll, right now, currently, how many people do you have on staff that oversee, and I'm not talking about, maybe you have more currently, but I know there's a charter license that you provide to like limousine type services or statewide travel. How many people do you have on staff that provide kind of the regulatory oversight to make sure that people are following the rules? If you give them the permit, how do you ensure that they're following the rules and staying within the guidelines of what that permit allows?
Right now, we have about 45 people in the branch. We have 15 that do the licensing, and then we have the remainder are split in Northern and Southern California and do various tasks.
So you have
I will
30,
tell
you have 30 that are out in the field? 30, about 30 that are out in the field inspecting?
Mm-hmm. I will tell you that I absolutely think that we could do more in this area, and I am looking forward to sitting down with the new division chief once we have that person and figuring out where are our resources currently, where are our gaps, and what do we need to do going forward. We do rely on local law enforcement to assist in this area, and one of the things, one of the tasks on my list in the next few months is we have, once phase 2 is adopted, we will have 2 decisions that set forth various rules, but we don't have a general order yet. And local law enforcement can cite, but they prefer to cite to a specific general order rather than a commission decision. And so we need to place all of our requirements into a general order so that local law enforcement is confident that they have something to cite to, something to refer to when they're doing citations. So we're looking at that. But I think all of this will be part of both the kind of initial analysis we do when we have a new division chief, and will also be part of the SB 541 study.
Do you have an estimate how many TNCs there are on the market in California?
I have heard various numbers. but I don't have off the top of my head. I've heard,
Any,
for
like,
instance,
ballpark?
that Uber has something like 16,000 statewide, or in San Francisco, I'm sorry, in San Francisco.
16,000 in San Francisco?
In San Francisco.
Alone? Please, ladies and gentlemen. Wow. So you have no concept of what that could mean statewide? It could be 50,000, it could be 100,000.
Well, I don't, those numbers do change. I mean, we have data that we have received that analyzes miles driven by the TNCs. So for instance, between, I think I have the numbers, there were, hold on. Okay, so the number of, between September 2013 and July 2015, 113 million rides were requested and accepted. By way of comparison, the vehicle miles traveled in the state for the month of August of last year were 67 billion miles. So there are a significant number of miles driven by TNCs, but 113 over the course of many months versus 67 billion in the month of August 2015 still a relatively small percentage of the number of vehicle miles traveled in the state.
So let's say there's 100,000 vehicles on the road, and you're requiring them to get regular maintenance or regular inspections. You're going to need a whole new division to be on top of these certificates. Are they going to be sending them in on a monthly, yearly? What is going to be your requirement? Because I imagine if I want to go out there and work for a month in my own personal car and I get it approved and I work for a month and then I leave and then another one comes in or 10 come in, you're going to have, I see that there's the potential for a lot of flux in this model.
We require the drivers to provide their certification to the TNCs, and we require the TNCs to maintain that data. So we don't collect and maintain those certificates. We have the ability to audit and request the information from the TNCs. So
you're not going to be asking that on a regular basis. So you're not really going to know how many vehicles are on the road.
We would have access to that information.
If they provide it.
If we request it.
Only if you request it. The other question I have is, so you won't really have the staff to police 100,000 vehicles statewide. That wouldn't be possible.
Well, first of all, I'm not sure the 100,000.
All right, let's say 30,000.
TNCs themselves.
Let's say 30,000.
But
we already know there's 16,000 just in one city, and that's not the most populous city in California. There are two more populated.
So the regulatory scheme, and as I mentioned, at the outset, the TNCs argued that they shouldn't be regulated at all, does require the TNCs as entities to collect a fair amount of data, to provide the information to us, and to ensure that their drivers follow the rules. And so in terms of the regulatory structure, our primary sort of point of contact is with the TNC itself. And as I mentioned, we have enforced rules against them in the past, and we will continue to do so.
The last question I have in terms of public safety, you mentioned that the police or the highway patrol or law enforcement will be doing a lot of the regulatory oversight.
They will do the on the road.
On the road. So a lot of these cars are not marked. They're my own personal vehicle without commercial plates. It doesn't have a number. It doesn't have an identifier as a for-hire vehicle. The only one that knows it's for hire is the customer. So
A
if it's,
TNC vehicle can be cited for failure to have trade dress.
so have what?
Trade dress.
Trade dress?
Yes, that is the requirement that they put their logo in the front window to identify themselves.
That's a removable.
And then they're required to have it in the back. Right, because they may not
How would
always.
they be cited if nobody even knows that they're being operated for hire?
If a customer complains that their driver is not carrying trade dress, or if a driver commits an infraction and is pulled over, the law enforcement officer can add a trade dress
So
citation.
the customer would have to call in real time saying, I'm in this for hire vehicle, and they don't have their sign on the window. Is that likely to happen?
Well, the customer can either, complain in real time, or they have the, car that they've hailed. I mean, they have it identified on their app so that they could complain to the TNC or to the PUC.
So really, there's no way for a police officer, unless somebody actually just complains about a placard not being posted, which, does the average consumer know that the placard should be posted? But is it their responsibility to call and complain about the placard not being posted? But if the only method is for law enforcement to regulate that vehicle is a placard being posted, I can see a lot of interesting activities happen between somebody who doesn't want to alert law enforcement that they may be violating a rule, or they may not be in compliance, or they may not have accurate insurance, or they, and I would encourage also a look in that area. If you're not going to have the staff and you're going to require law enforcement to provide that role, there's got to be a way to communicate with law enforcement. Maybe you have access, or law enforcement have access to when these vehicles are operational in terms of some kind of technology communication saying, or some kind of, taxis have they have the little peanut lights that flash when the driver's in distress. The driver could be robbed. The driver could be having an altercation with a customer. They flash on the emergency lights, and law enforcement's alerted. How would an Uber communicate, or a Lyft, or any of those industries communicate with law enforcement over one of those? I mean, these are people that are out there making a living, customers that are being provided a service, and all the different altercations that arise from that. There needs to be a communication with law enforcement. I really encourage you to look at that as well. But I appreciate, anybody, did you want to say?
Yeah, just a clarifying question. Thank you, by the way. Senator Waso mentioned the stickers, I guess, on the car. On the app, the Uber or the Lyft app, isn't there, if I'm not mistaken, the clients can, or the riders can fill out a survey of good service, that type of thing? Do you have that on there? Did they display their sticker? Is that on that app?
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
He was asking a question, how would the client know there's supposed to be a sticker on that car? And what I'm saying is there is an app that the client can rate the Uber driver or the Lyft driver.
Right.
Is one of those questions, did they clearly display their sticker? In other words, that would be one way to solve it if that question's in there, to address Senator Waso's question. I'm just wondering, is that question in there?
Yeah, I'm not aware that it's specifically identified in there, but that is an example where if you are rating a driver, you can point that out, or the TNCs could add that to the.
Senator Morale, are you implying that whenever there's a bad rating, that be reported directly to the Highway Patrol or to law enforcement?
I had not thought that far along.
Okay.
I was just wanting to have her answer your question about the stickers, because that seemed to be important to you, and I just wondered if that was one of the questions that they had on their app.
I'm asking that in the spirit of you're going to have, let's say, potentially 30,000, 40,000 vehicles on the road that are not being, that they won't have the people power or the ability to regulate. So whether these vehicles are inspected, whether they're insured, whether they're following the rules. There will be no, a law is only worth your ability to enforce it. That's really my point. If you create a rule but you can't enforce it, there's no rule.
Yeah, and I think.
And I'm just trying to get to the extent of, is the PUC creating rules that they can enforce? And if they are, what is the enforcement mechanism? And if it's law enforcement, they're not going to be out there trying to decipher what car, at night, what car. It's easy to decipher a taxi in the traffic, but these vehicles, you can't find them at night because they're not marked. And even if they had a window, a placard, try to see that at night in a vehicle moving 50 miles an hour down the road.
Yeah, I think what this is, it's a hearing. We're not making any decisions. We're here to compile information. And, I'm trying to thread that needle as a legislator who believes in the free market, who wants the free market to prosper. We want to protect the rider, but we don't want a police state either. So trying to find that, how to thread that needle in the appropriate way so all sides win. Thank you.
Okay, very well. We're going to continue. Thank you. That was great. With Eva Chung, and then Annette Williams, and then Bob Lockhart. Thank you for being here.
Chairman Hueso, Chairman Beal, and Senators, thank you for having us here and taking the time to learn about this issue. I'm here today to speak on behalf of the San Francisco Airport and some of our experiences with the TNCs over the past 3 years, pretty much side by side with the CPUC, and also some of our experiences with ground transportation operators in general and some of our observations. So to start with, I'll talk a little bit about our experience. Our focus has been primarily on safety at an airport. That is our #1 priority. And then secondary to that, we want to create a level playing field for all of our ground transportation operators that pay fees. And we are very interested in the customer experience and that they have a choice at the airport for how they want to get to and from the airport. And we've been engaged in all levels of the legislative process, including the CPUC hearings and all of the bills that have been introduced in the previous 2 years. We were one of the first entities to apply any enforcement to TNCs. That was meaningful, that we got stats on vehicles, a number of vehicles coming to the airport, and tried to gain compliance with the state and airport regulations. As regulation was developed at the state level, we then engaged with the TNCs to understand their business models and how we might be able to fit them into our structures at the airport. And we found that the TNCs were willing to pay fees like other operators did, but some of the data sharing was points of contention that we had to get through. In October 2014, we did get 3 companies permitted, went to 4, now we're down to 3, 1 has dropped out of the market. And we realized after we started gathering some data from them with our tracking tool that we grossly underestimated the volume of TNCs and how popular they were with customers to and from the airport. TNCs have taken a market share, TNC drivers, from almost all of our ground transportation options to the airport, including public transit. We believe some of our parking revenues. But the other side of it is that they have increased our market share of commercial operations. So they've also taken from people who may have taken a personal ride to the airport before. We saw a 40% increase in December, over December numbers alone in commercial trips to the airport. And we only saw a 6% increase in customers. So that's pretty significant to show what kind of market they're serving. We do have pilot permits out right now. That period is ending soon, the end of this month. And so we're working to develop with the TNCs what a more lasting permit will look like. Information that we examined when we permitted the TNCs, we really wanted to be able to track vehicles. It's very important to us because we charge trip fees at the airport. So we needed accurate tracking and understanding what new technologies were there that could side by side with our current transponders that we put on other vehicles. We have major concerns about traffic and congestion and controlling that in our roadways so that customers can get easily to and from the airport. And we recognize that commercial ground transportation is extremely competitive in the airport market. We have thousands of permits, over 5,000 limo vehicles alone permitted at the airport, as well as 2,500 taxis that come in just from San Francisco and other entities around the area. We needed to understand and trust some of this new technology. It was a big hurdle for us. And in developing new technology that we have for tracking within a geofence on the airport, we are finding that it to be quite accurate with the information, but we wanted self-reporting, but we wanted a way to also be able to verify what kind of activity was going on our property. Some of our observations up to this point, we are a permitting entity, not a regulatory body. And so we're very familiar with various distinctions of each regulatory agency in California, whether it's the state or the local or the county. And we have various permits that are tailored to those requirements when they come to insurance and background checks and those types of things. We also recognize that there's many inconsistencies across the board, from taxis in different jurisdictions and limo vehicles to buses to shared ride vans and all of the other modes that come into the airport. And the background checks, we have 3 background checks, vehicle checks, and insurance requirements, we think, are the 3 fundamental components in protecting public safety and consumer protection. So we support consistent minimum standards for all drivers and vehicles. That's been very inconsistent even for TCP limo drivers, as well as the TNCs did have some sort of background check, but no concrete requirements, which we're looking forward to from the CPUC's decisions. We also support background checks that include fingerprinting. That I know there's a lot of different opinions on what a solid background check is, but we believe law enforcement should be allowed to weigh in on what sort of background checks are effective. Fingerprints are identification purposes, but some of these other background checks that go into histories are required that the TNCs do as well. We currently conduct comprehensive inspections for all taxis for the city of San Francisco at the airport. We also do inspections for all buses, vans, and shuttles that we permit at the airport. However, limos at this point, we only do visual inspections for because of the regulations not allowing there or not being consistent enough that we can keep limos from getting a permit with us. We're hopeful that will be changed in the newest CPUC decision, because it does extend to TCP vehicles, that those inspections be made annually. Let me see this. We have felt in the past couple of years that we appear to be the de facto enforcement agency for violations of the CPUC. We do enforce at the airport against CPUC violations at SFO, and our officers
Do you charge any fees to the industry for?
Yes, we do. We have actually charged close to $1 million in violations of various CPUC regulations to the entities. If they're permitted, we have administrative fines that we levy against all operators.
You can enforce CPUC regulations?
Yes. We have law enforcement that does the CPUC regulations. We write the CPUC regulations into our permits, and that allows us to then levy administrative fines.
But do you have
against
any
the companies.
specific permit that you give that they pay for? In addition to, I'm not talking about just fines, but do you charge a permit fee?
There are inspection fees. There's not per se a permit fee, it's a trip fee. Each permit has its own
What's a
type of
trip fee?
fees.
Okay.
So there's trip fees for all of the operators at the airport, and there's different structures involved
So
with that.
they're included in that?
They're all included in that, all operators, including courtesy shuttles, shared ride vans, all of our commercial ground transportation has a permit to operate on property, and they have trip fees associated with their
Okay, great.
regulations.
We'll move on if
Okay.
you want to close up maybe.
Yeah. So in conclusion, distinguishing factors between different services is definitely being narrowed. I think that's one of the things legislation can address. And we recognize that the explosive growth of TNCs and the transformation of ground transportation industry isn't just about cost. Consumers say to us all the time that it's about reliability, convenience, and customer experience. So we believe future regulations need to balance that public safety with those demands of the customers as well.
I agree. Thank you.